of the Tobago Business Chamber and attorney at law, Mr. Martin George. Mr. George is here with us, of course, to discuss the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on the island, as well as potential recovery plans, the borders reopening, the fast ferries, the CAL situation, and so much more. So here's an invitation to sit back and join us. Hello and welcome, Mr. George.
Hi, good morning to you and good morning to all your viewers on ieTV. It's always a pleasure to appear on your program because, I love the fact that we're able to share and discuss ideas and, always have an elevated level of discourse so that, persons can learn, they can appreciate, they can grow when they hear us discuss things that they may think of something in a different way that they may not have seen it or heard it before, and that's how we as human beings all develop.
Right, great. So, Mr. George, let's get the ball rolling. The COVID-19 pandemic has been affecting both Trinidad and Tobago in particular since March 2020, particularly with the closure of our borders, public restrictions, public health regulations. What is the situation in Tobago like today in particular? And let's go back to March 2020 as well. From March 2020 up until today, what has the situation been like in Tobago?
Well, it has been pretty traumatic, I can tell you, for most business persons and even for lots of individuals who may have either been put on reduced salaries or some who may have lost their employment totally. It's particularly hard on the micro entrepreneurs, and these are the ones we feel it for most. The person who may have a little parlor running, who may have a little place selling either your doubles or your alu pies or whatever. These are the persons, I think, who really have been hit the hardest, because at the end of the day, in those types of enterprises, they usually function on a cash basis. So basically, what they earn for the day is what they have to live on, plus plow back some of it into tomorrow's production for your materials, whatever. So therefore, it's difficult when they have absolutely no source of income in that regard. It has also exposed, I think, the fact that there are so many unregulated, unregistered persons in terms of businesses who have now recognized that, look, okay, to qualify even for the government loans or the government subventions or the government assistance, when you look at the list of requirements, sometimes some of these small and micro entrepreneurs, they have not satisfied those requirements, so therefore they can't even apply for the assistance. So,
Right.
I mean, of course, that is something that they will have to ultimately address, if you understand me, because we
Right.
always try to encourage persons who are in business to understand the fundamentals of having like your VAT registration, your BIR, making sure that these things are in place. Because at the end of the day, if you want your business to grow and prosper, you can't do it without satisfying these regulatory criteria. So
Right.
it's something we are trying to actively encourage the smaller businesses to do. But the point is, being caught unawares due to the pandemic, just dropping on everybody. When the government set out their requirements for persons to be able to apply for loans or to be able to apply for assistance, a lot of these smaller enterprises were not able to meet the documentary and regulatory requirements that were put in place by the government to be able to qualify for the assistance.
Right, and of course, Mr. George, we are all very familiar with reports that businesses are closing, businesses are shutting their doors permanently. A lot of business owners, small business owners, small restaurants and food establishments as well, have indicated that they are running out of their savings. They don't have savings anymore. Um, is there a backup plan in place for a situation such as that?
Well, the thing is, I mean, okay, I can tell you, right, for instance, from a Tobago perspective, the government did roll out the tourism assistance grants, but of course, you had to be a registered tourism entity, and you again had to meet lots of very stringent criteria.
Right.
So If you were not able to meet those criteria, you basically would not even be able to get the grant. So the thing is, there are quite a few businesses, as I say, who not only would not have been able to meet those criteria, but whose resources during the interim would have run out, and those are the ones whom are most vulnerable, and those are the ones who we are most concerned about, because there are quite a few enterprises which, after we emerge from this pandemic, when we finally emerge, they will not survive. And that's the reality. I mean, of course, some of it may be circumstances where persons may have had difficulties even prior to the pandemic, and it's just been exacerbated during the pandemic. But the point is, we have to recognize as a fact that some businesses will not emerge from this, unscathed.
Mr. George, would that include tour guides as well?
Well, the thing is, so let's just think of it. In terms of tour guides, the main base for your industry as a tour guide would be the foreign visitor. Because most Trinidadians who come to Tobago for vacation, they don't really require the assistance of a tour guide. Either they would have a friend or a relative or somebody in Tobago who could take them around, or Tobago is so small you could drive around on your own and fine. So it's really the foreign visitors who would be the ones who would want to require the services of a tour guide. So in those circumstances, I would think that definitely, given the fact that your international arrivals are basically at zero, then of course tour guides and even those who do the Boku Reef tours and all those people, they are. I mean, right now everything is shut down. Your beaches are closed, your bars are closed, your restaurants are closed. So it brings you even to the idea where the government had spoken about reopening the borders on July 17th. And for the life of me, I can't fathom the logic behind it when you're telling me that that is supposed to help boost tourism in Tobago. How is that going to do anything? If your beaches remain closed, your bars remain closed, your restaurants are closed, the entire country is still in a state of total lockdown, right? We're under a curfew, we're under a state of emergency. First of all, which visitor in their right mind, when they look at the world map, will say, okay, I'm going to choose to go to a country that is currently under a state of emergency? I mean, it makes absolutely no sense. So, we think that certainly there has been a missed opportunity in terms of getting the vaccinations right and getting that vaccination program ramped up early o'clock. And I think the entire nation, not just Tobago, because I always like to look at things from, a holistic perspective of us as Trinidad and Tobago. And I think as a nation, Trinidad and Tobago has suffered, and we continue to suffer as a result.
So, Mr. George, let's go back to the borders reopening. So, based on what you're saying, therefore, at this point in time, it does not make sense to reopen the borders?
Well, I know I'm not saying it doesn't make sense to reopen the borders, but I'm saying it makes no sense to have borders reopened and your country closed.
Right.
That's as simple as I can put it, because the thing is, if your country is closed, think of it, your businesses are largely closed. Your restaurants, your bars, even some of the bigger enterprises like Price Mart, you're restricted in what you could get there. You're restricted in what you could get at Pennywise. So therefore, in other words, what is the purpose of proclaiming to the world, borders are going to be reopened, and you're probably telling foreign carriers and airlines, oh yes, you could fly to Trinidad. Nobody's going to come. Nobody's going to want to come. Even lots of our foreign nationals who may have been clamoring to come back, do you really think they want to come back and be under a state of emergency, under a curfew? By 9 p.m. you have to be inside. You can't even go anywhere. You can't do anything. Cinemas are closed. Everything is closed. I mean, the malls are closed. Let's think of it realistically. So clearly, we are not yet in a state of readiness.
Right. And of course, Mr. George, my question with this, in terms of the borders remaining, sorry, that should be the borders potential being open on July 17th, limited persons perhaps visiting the island. Can Tobago survive on local Trinidadian support by itself?
Well, the thing is, actually, I mean, the reality is, and I have been saying this for years now, is that for the last decade and more, Tobago's quote unquote tourism has been Trinidadians primarily, and that's the reality. And
Right.
it's something that I always tell Tobagonians: you need to understand, and you need to, redefine in your mind what is a tourist. The Trinidadian who comes with his family and spends a week in Tobago, that is a tourist. They're all tourists. So therefore, you need to understand that you need to treat them in a way that you would treat any other quote unquote foreign tourist whom you may want to give preference to. You need to understand that, look, hey, this Trinidadian who comes here, he's shopping at Pennywise, he's shopping at Penny Savers, he's buying groceries, he has to put gas in his car, he has to probably rent a vehicle, he might stay in your guest house. This is how you get business. So therefore, we need to understand this and recognize that, look, the paradigm has shifted,
Right.
right? We are not anywhere near the other Caribbean islands, say, for instance, St. Lucia, Barbados, even Grenada. Grenada is light years ahead of us in terms of tourism, and that has largely been because of the Sandals project. That has changed the face of Grenada's tourism, which is why when that project was touted for Tobago, I was at the forefront, and our Tobago Business Chamber, we clamored for that project to continue because we said that is going to be one of the best things for Tobago because you were
Right.
getting two hotels, the Sandals plus the beaches. When you if you ever stayed at a Sandals resort or beaches resort, you will understand it. In fact, there will be no argument as to why Tobago needs that. You would understand immediately the value that that brand brings. That's an internationally recognized brand. That's a brand that is synonymous with quality. It's a 5 diamond rated property. So
Right.
therefore, once you are associated with sandals, people will come to your island for the sandals. They may not even know much about your island, but they will
Right.
come to Tobago, and then the way Sandals does their marketing, they market your island. So, for instance, internationally, you will see Sandals Grenada. So people may not know Grenada, but they will say, look, there's a Sandals in Grenada. I'm going to go there because I'm going to Sandals. And the
Right.
benefits are there.
Mr. George, do you think a project such as that, such as Sandals or beaches, would then perhaps force, for lack of a better word at this time, other resorts and guest house on the islands to step up their game as well?
Well, actually, that's such a good question because that's exactly what happened in Grenada. And I'll give you the example because I've been there, I've been to that Sandals several times, and I've spoken with all the hoteliers around, so I know the story. What happens is when the idea was for Sandals to come to Grenada, the small hotels, they reacted very much in the same way that lots of persons in Tobago reacted. They felt that they couldn't compete, and Sandals is going to take all the profits, it's going to take all the money, it's going to take. And do you know it has been exactly the opposite? Sandals has actually raised the standard for everybody. So the quality of the tourism product in Grenada has gotten so much better that you have much more visitors coming to the Grenada. And
Right.
then when there's the overflow from Sandals and persons can't get accommodation in Sandals, they then look around and say, well, okay, which other hotel nearby or in Grenada I can go to? And they
Right.
have gotten so much spin-off business from Sandals. The chauffeurs, the taxi drivers, they sing the praises of Sandals because they have gotten such constant and consistent work from Sandals as a result. Because the way Sandals does it is that from the time you book your flight to the time you embark on your return flight, they take care of you. So therefore, when you land at the airport, you are met by a Sandals taxi or a Sandals van. So therefore, that's a local person who's getting a job to bring the tourists to the airport, take them from the airport to the Sandals resort. They take you straight to the resort. You have persons who do like water sports and stuff like that, who are now contracted by Sandals. So therefore, they run the Sandals water sports facility. So there's so much spin-off business. They work with the local farmers, and they will say, "Listen, I need 1,000 pounds of plantains, 1,000 pounds of bananas, 1,000 pounds of tomatoes each week." And the point is, so there is so much more that you can look at in terms of the benefits. You can't just take a narrow, perspective of, you're afraid of competition. We must never be afraid of competition when it comes to business.
Of course, and with that, speaking of business, we must go to a very short break and return with more. Stay tuned.
We all want to save money without compromising on the best quality insurance coverage. If you are renewing your motor or homeowner insurances soon, then call us at ieTV Consultants. With over 27 years in the insurance industry, we can offer you significant at ieTVgroupmail@gmail.com.
Listen to iRadio at www.iradiott.com every day for devotional programming from 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. Classic Hits Daily, a simulcast of I News from 6:30 p.m. At 7 p.m., a discourse from the Padmacharya of Swaha Pandit Hardev Prasad and the best of Bollywood hits overnight. iRadio, streaming at www.iradiott.com to educate, enlighten, and entertain with you wherever you go. iRadio.
Welcome back to News and Views right here on ieTV and on iRadioTT.com with me, Bina Mahis. Our guest with us today virtually, the president of the Tobago Business Chamber, as well as prominent attorney Martin George. We are discussing the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on the island of Tobago and, of course, business recovery plans. Before we went to the break, of course, Mr. George, we were discussing the potential of bigger investors on the island and how it can benefit Tobago itself. So let's just recap that. We were discussing the idea of a sandals resort on the island, right? And of course that idea was squashed. And but since that idea has been squashed or was squashed, did businesses decide to take it upon themselves to improve it in the island as well?
Well, the thing is, I think because of the pandemic, persons were forced to try and use that opportunity. Some were able to do repairs to their properties and do improvements because the government loans were specifically for that purpose in terms of assisting the tourism enterprises in that regard. But
Right.
you see, let me tell you, what Tobago needs in terms of its tourism product is a game changer.
Right.
You can't at this stage be looking to make incremental steps or baby steps to try and improve your tourism product because everybody's ahead of us, right? All the other islands are ahead of us. If you go to somewhere like Anguilla, you go to St. Martin, St. Thomas, I mean, their tourism products are so well, advanced. You go to Jamaica, you look at what is happening there, and you recognize that, hey, listen, Tobago needs a quantum leap. I mean, look at, say, for instance, an island like St. Lucia. St. Lucia had 3 sandals resorts. And during the time that Tobago was, dithering and twiddling its thumbs to try to decide whether they wanted the sandals resort or not, St. Lucia said, listen, we want a 4th one. Because they recognize the value of it. They recognize how much this brings to their island. Look, I got an email last night from, someone who had said that they had been on a flight some time back from the UK. And they said, the ultimate destination was Tobago. So they were so happy because they said, wow, a full flight going to Tobago. And no, the flight stopped off in St. Lucia. About half the passengers came off. They stopped off in Barbados. The rest of the passengers came off, and the person said there were just like about 10 persons coming to Tobago, some of whom were actually Tobagonians returning home. So therefore, when you say that you're getting a flight from the UK coming to Tobago with visitors, you may end up with about 2 or 3 people actually on that flight. And with Tobago being the last destination, we actually pay the most for that flight. So in other words, we basically are funding other islands who get the visitors first. So therefore, what's the point? We really need to recognize what tourism is about. And I have always said, listen, tourism is about the experience. That is the most important thing. It's the experience. So therefore, from the time you start your journey, you must have that pleasant experience till the time you return home. So that way you go back home with a smile on your face, you beaming, you can't stop talking about that place because it has been such a wonderful experience. And that's why I
Right.
tell you, like the way Sanders manages it, it's from start to finish. They want to ensure that you have a perfect experience. And that's what Tobago doesn't seem to understand about
Right.
tourism. So
Right.
therefore, your taxi drivers, they're supposed to give the most pleasant experience to the visitor. It doesn't matter who it is, right? So it doesn't matter that you say, well, okay, this person is a Trinidadian or this. No, no, no. That's a visitor. You're supposed to give them the best possible experience. You're not supposed to be trying to overcharge them or, rob them or, give them bad service or bad attitude or anything of the sort, because that is all part of the experience. And the visitor wants the best experience. And if it is that persons are getting bad experiences in Tobago, they will take their money and go elsewhere.
Right.
That's the reality.
Right, of course. And before we could perhaps look into some sort of normalcy and some sort of development for the island, the major thing that must be done at this point in time is vaccination. I know that you're very passionate about that. You're very vocal about vaccination in Tobago. Let's have an update on that.
All right, okay. So, as you would recall, I was the first one who suggested. And you see, I think what needs to happen in a situation such as this pandemic is that governments need to recognize that, look, nobody has all the answers, nobody has all the solutions. So therefore, you have to listen to the voice of private enterprise, you have to listen to the voice of the business people, you have to listen to the voice of the public sector, because everybody can make an input. It may not be that everybody's input is the same weight or value, but listen to what people are saying. From early o'clock, I said, listen, the fastest way out of this for Trinidad and Tobago, and that's the thing. My solutions are always for both Trinidad and Tobago. It's not like, you focus on one island alone. No.
Right.
The fastest way would have been for Tobago to have been vaccinated first. It's a small population, maybe about 60,000 people. To achieve that 70% for herd immunity, you're talking 42,000 vaccines. That could have been easily achieved very quickly. Within less than a month, you could have had that done. If it is Tobago was vaccinated, then look at all the benefits and spin-offs. First of all, as I suggested, the benefit would have been that you would have been able to open up your international borders immediately through Tobago. So in other words, persons can come, land in Tobago because your population is vaccinated there. So therefore, if it is that they have to quarantine, then that means business for the guest houses and the hotels in Tobago because they have to quarantine. But then once they quarantine, then they can then now, if it's returning nationals, if their stop is in Trinidad, they can then, after doing the quarantine in Tobago, then go across to Trinidad. Then you could have now your international visitors return in. Because let me tell you, Trinidad and Tobago is living in such an alternate reality. The world has opened back up for business. Trinidad and Tobago is one of the few countries that we are still in this lockdown, this closed down mode. The world has gone ahead. Let me tell you, in the US, in Florida, property prices are skyrocketing. You cannot even get a new car because the orders are so backed up, because there's so many persons. Business is thriving. The US economy grew almost 7% in the first quarter of 2021. The economy grew. What is the economy in Trinidad and Tobago doing? It's shrinking, it's contracting. You've seen stories of NGC losing $2.1 billion. You've seen other stories of, other enterprises, be it WASA is $1 billion in debt, TNTech is $1 billion. So what is happening with our economy that we are doing wrong while others are thriving? The point is, the pandemic has been a challenge, it has been a crisis, but in the midst of every crisis, you look for the opportunities.
Right.
And that's why I keep saying we have had a missed opportunity. So even our proposal for the vaccination for Tobago first, we were trying to give an opportunity for the government, because we said, you know what, if that's the case, then that means all your businesses in Tobago, your restaurants, your bars, they could be open. You know, you could have persons from Trinidad now coming across to Tobago, enjoying a vacation because the population in Tobago is inoculated. They are vaccinated. What you do, you make sure that persons have a negative PCR test before they came across. But then once they have that, then they could come, they could enjoy themselves. Your beaches would then be open, your rivers, your whatever, so that people can at least breathe. Because I think there's a tremendous level of frustration in the nation right now, because everybody just feels like you're under this repression, this restrictive regime that, you know, it's just curtailing everything. And you really ask yourself, what has been the net effect of that? Except to increase frustration, close down businesses, cause people to lose money, cause people to get frustrated, you know, put strain on families. Because, you know, in the family, that's where you feel it most. Because at the end of the day, if you know, say for instance, a family member has either lost his job or lost his income, he's under pressure, then he's home all the time, right? So frustrations grow, tensions rise, you know, then of course you see the increase in, you know, incidents among family members, or you see increases in domestic violence, in abuse, whatever. Because the point is, people are, it's a lot of built up frustration there. And then you add to that economic frustration, and of course it's going to boil over.
Mr. George, you mentioned the word family. Of course, Tobago is perhaps one of the most popular destinations for locals here in Trinidad to visit during the July-August vacation period, which we are, of course, approaching next week or later on this week. Most places are on lockdown. Movement is limited. What do you see? I mean, a lot of persons earlier on in the year would have depended on this particular period to get, you know, a kickstart with their business once more. What can you predict come next week or next month?
Well, this is what I'm saying. And you see, that's where the signals from the government, unfortunately, appear to be conflicting and confusing. Because when you speak about opening back up your borders and reopening your borders, then the natural consequence you would think is that, hey, we're reopening for business. But that's not what the government is saying. Look, even the construction sector, you know, I mean, how do you explain the illogical scenario of saying you're opening the government construction sector, which probably employs the greatest number of people, but yet still you're keeping the private sector closed? The government projects are usually the largest projects, so therefore you have the largest concentrations and groupings of construction workers present at one site. But you're opening that. But a private contractor who may have 5 employees, 6 employees, whatever, you say no, he can't do anything. How do you justify those things? They really don't seem, and I mean, this is with the greatest of respect and deference, because at the end of the day, maybe the government sees things from a perspective that we ordinary citizens can't. But, you know, you always must still apply logic and common sense to the decisions when you are assessing and analyzing them. And these are the things that we can't understand, because when you have a situation, if it is that all your restaurants, bars, your beaches are closed in Tobago, then you ask yourself, well, okay, so what is a family supposed to do if they come to Tobago? You know, if they have to be inside by 9 p.m., you know, then how are they to enjoy a vacation? They can't go out on the reef, you know, they can't do a rainforest tour, you know, you in fact, you can't even go outside and exercise. You know, so it's really a scenario that makes absolutely no sense. And the government needs to move speedily to ramp up the vaccination drive and ensure that we get ourselves together, get our act together, so that we are able to say, hey, listen, we are vaccinated, we are back open for business, because that is the key. From early o'clock, I have said, and I use the mantra, I said vaccination, mass vaccination is the only solution.
Okay,
mass
great.
vaccination, the only solution.
And with that in mind, once more, we must take a very short break and return us more. Stay tuned.
ieTV requires marketing representatives. Previous experience in radio and TV sales would be an asset. Full-time and part-time positions are available. For details and to schedule an interview, email your resume to ieTVgroupadmin@gmail.com. ieTVgroupadmin@gmail.com.
Listen to IE Radio at www.ieradiott.com every day for devotional programming from 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. Classic Hits Daily is simulcast of IE News from 6:30 p.m. At 7 p.m. it is discourse from the Padmacharya of Swaha Pandit Hardev Prasad and the best of Bollywood hits overnight. IE Radio streaming at www.ieradiott.com to educate, enlighten, and entertain with you wherever you go. IE Radio.
Welcome back to News and Views right here on ieTV and on ieradiott.com with me, Bina Mahis. On set with us virtually, the President of the Tobago Business Chamber and Attorney at Law, Mr. Martin George. We are, of course, discussing the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on the island of Tobago. Before we went to the break, we were also discussing Tobago's vaccination drive and the July-August vacation is upon us, literally. And what's the situation for the island for persons who would want to travel to the island? Mr. George, the Prime Minister, of course, would have announced that come July 17th, our borders would be opened. That is so far. Now, let's just say, for example, after the borders are reopened, there is another spike in cases because, one, of limited vaccinations, or two, the mix in the population between Trinidad, Tobago, and visitors from outside. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think that Tobago and Trinidad, by extension, can afford another lockdown or continuous lockdowns?
Well, this is the point. And, at some stage, we have to think of doing it differently. And, the key has always been to get the mass vaccinations, right? And if you look at what other countries are doing, you look at Germany, you look at Sweden, you look at Austria, you look at France, their governments have encouraged vaccinations from day one. In fact, Angela Merkel, Chancellor of Germany, she was one of the leaders who said, listen, check the research, and once it's possible, let's mix and match vaccines. So in other words, even if you've had the first dose of AstraZeneca, you could have the second dose in Pfizer. It doesn't matter. The idea is get the population inoculated as quickly as possible and in the shortest space of time so that you achieve the target of the herd immunity. Instead, we unfortunately had some incidents where you saw, with the U.S. ambassador, there was a tiff between him and the government, and then you saw even with the Indian High Commissioner, there was a to-in and fro-in. These are not things you need. You need to get everybody on board, get help from wherever. If you understand me, so then you saw initially with a private company who had said they would get 100,000 vaccines, then the government said no, they didn't give them permission. At the end of the day, listen, come on, you don't have time to stand on a soapbox and be stroking your ego. The idea is get the vaccines into the country, make sure they're the approved vaccines, make sure, of course, they're from reputable sources. And once they are, then now you embark upon a program to sensitize the population to make sure that you get over vaccine hesitancy and the anti-vaxxers and the persons who may be cautious or fearful. You get that message out there. What the government should have been doing, engage your local artists. You have people like Dilly Nadan, you have Marshall Montano, you have Kes, you have all these people who are popular voices in the community. Even like, for instance, lovely, beautiful television show hosts such as yourself. They could engage persons like you all to get that message out there to the population to say, listen, vaccination is the solution. I have been vaccinated. This is the solution. Let's get vaccinated. You get that message out there. Let me tell you, in the US, they're using President Obama. They're using former President Obama. They're using his wife, Michelle Obama. They're using John Legend. They're using all other big stars to do ads to get that message out there. They're using Ice-T. So therefore people are out there doing ads, getting the message to the population, get vaccinated. They are actually advertising things where they're telling you, listen, if you can't come to get the vaccine, we will come home and administer it to you for free. In the US, listen, anybody, you present your ID, you present your passport, it doesn't matter where you're from, you just go to the pharmacy and you get the vaccine for free. You go to the wherever they're delivering it or issuing it, you go and because you know what? They want to ensure mass vaccination because they want to be back up and running. And that's where our focus should have been in Trinidad and Tobago. Because you see, the lockdowns and the curfews, I understand the need for it in terms of restricting movements, but we have to understand that that is a repressive measure which is not a solution to the problem. So, in other words, it's a containment measure. So, you, of course, try to contain the problem. But the point is, after you contain it, then you still need a solution because eventually you have to lift the restrictions, eventually you have to open back up the country. And the only way you can do that is if you have your vaccinations up to speed, up to standard, and up to, the mass distribution that is necessary. So these are areas that I think the government fell down, respectfully. And I mean, I say this always very, very respectfully, because at the end of the day, the government has been trying, but the point is no one is perfect. And if it is that there are areas that we can point out where they can improve and where we can assist, then of course we ought to work hand in hand to ensure that Trinidad and Tobago gets to a better place because we are not there yet. So therefore, when you talk about opening borders, if we don't have our vaccinations up to speed and we don't have the mass vaccinations, to reach that herd immunity, then of course there is the potential for that spike afterwards, as you say. And then of course, what do? We can't go into another lockdown. The country cannot survive another lockdown
Right.
after this one.
Right, and speaking of survive, firsthand, Mr. George, can you give our viewers a bit of an insight as to what's taking place with the population of Tobago? The cost of living has increased within the last 2 to 3 months. The cost of food items, the cost of market items has increased over the past 2 to 3 months with jobs decreasing. How are the islanders surviving?
Well, it's been challenging for a lot of people. And you know what, personally, for me, was such a poignant and powerful experience. Our office, our Tobago office, did a Mother's Day hamper distribution drive,
Right.
right? Whereby we gave out 100, big hampers, with food items and stuff like that for Mother's Day for single mothers. And we were oversubscribed by more than 1,000 applicants, but it was only 100 because, well, we had no idea the extent of the need. So we said, well, okay, we'll start with 100. We have since had to increase because we keep getting the calls all the time. People approach me, they meet me, they message me, they text me, they send messages on Facebook, they say, are you all still giving out hampers? Do you have any more? And they give their situations and you realize, listen, there are some really desperate circumstances. We've had messages from some single mothers who say that they have 5 or 6 kids, no father around, no job, no income. And, it's really, really difficult. So what I have been doing, and I must give credit to both the Chief Secretary, Mr. Ansel Dennis, and the leader of the PNM in Tobago, Ms. Tracy Davidson Celestin. I have been actually gathering names and forwarding to them directly to say, well, look, these are additional people because our hamper drive has finished. I mean, we will do a next one for Christmas, but the additional persons who keep messaging me, I've been actually liaising with the THU officials through Mr. Dennis and Ms. Davidson Celestin to say, listen, I'm referring this person to you, try and see what you can do to help. So it tells you there's tremendous need out there. Look at what happened in South when there was the hamper distribution drive. So therefore the government has to recognize that, listen, there is a tremendous need out there. People are suffering. I mean, some people may put on a brave face and they may try to say, well, look, I'm coping, I'm managing. But at the end of the day, survival is critical, and we have to ensure that the basics are there for our population because that's the purpose of a government. You are there to take care of your people, and the most vulnerable and the most needy are the ones who need the most attention.
Right.
We have to recognize that as business persons, listen, one way or the other, you could try to pivot, you could try to rearrange things, you may survive. But the point is, someone who is dependent on a job, if they lose that job and they have no salary, no income, no other means of feeding themselves and their children, they end up in a very, very desperate situation.
Right, and of course, reopening businesses and smaller establishments could perhaps help in a situation like this.
Of course, and the thing is that that's why, if you remember from the start, I said, our greatest concern in terms of from a business perspective is the small and micro enterprises, the person with the parlor, the person with the double stand, the person with the roti shop, the persons who selling a little lunch counter, where they're selling, or maybe selling pies and things from the back of their van. Remember, all of those things have been stopped, all of those things, but yet still you have the big enterprises that are still functioning. You have the chain supermarkets that are still functioning. So therefore, you ask yourself, well, why is it that the small man is always the one to feel the brunt of the burden?
Right.
And that cannot be right, and it cannot be allowed to continue, because these people are the voiceless, the ones that nobody stands up for and speaks for. So that's why I love programs such as this, and I will always participate and give my time freely, because I love to shine a light on these types of situations so that the government can understand that more needs to be done for the most vulnerable in our society.
Mr. George, do you expect to see an increase in entrepreneurship come July 17th?
Well, the thing is, I don't think July 17th represents a magic date that you'll suddenly see that happen. But what we've been doing with our members, particularly, we've been advising them, look, use this opportunity to retool, refine, reshape, redefine your business. There may be areas where you can cut and reduce expenses. There may be areas where you can expand and grow. The point is, you must always have your eye open and be alert for opportunities. Because in every crisis, in every disaster, there's always an opportunity awaiting. Look at, for instance, something like the Zoom online platform. Look at how the shares in that company have skyrocketed since the pandemic, because of the fact that people need video conferencing, they need this ability, even what we're using today,
right.
If you understand me.
Yes.
So therefore, there are always opportunities, and it's a question of opening your eyes, looking around, and being alive to what is there and what is possible. And that's why we of the Tobago Business Chamber, and I myself personally, I always love coming on these programs and discussing ideas, because that way you can shine a light and give people a pathway that can lead to success.
Of course, and with that, we must go to our final break and return with more. Stay tuned.
MRK Consultants, agent for Presidential Insurance Company Limited, is celebrating 16 years of insurance services. With convenient parking and knowledgeable staff, MRK Consultants are geared to provide all your motor insurance needs, including third-party and comprehensive coverage for all your motor vehicles. Call or visit our office today. MRK Consultants, Chandrahari Building, number 9, Todd Street, El Socorro, 221-5051. Save on your motor insurances. Call MRK today.
Listen to iRadio at www.iradiott.com every day for devotional programming from 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. Classic Hits Daily, a simulcast of News from 6:30 p.m. At 7 p.m. a discourse from the Padmacharya of Swaha Pandit Hardev Prasad and the best of Bollywood hits overnight. IE Radio, streaming at www.iradiott.com to educate, enlighten, and entertain with you wherever you go. IE Radio.
Welcome back to News and Views right here on ieTV and of course on iRadioTT.com with me, Bina Mahis, on set with us virtually. Just in case you're now tuning in, the president of the Tobago Business Chamber and attorney at law, Mr. Martin George. We are of course discussing the Covid-19 pandemic and its effects on the island, on the island's business and on citizens. Now, within the last 2 to 3 days, Mr. George is here to explain to us what this bill means and what it would mean for us citizens here in Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. George.
Okay, all right. So there are two bills actually before the Parliament currently. And today, actually, they're supposed to be moving to the committee stages.
Yes.
The two bills are the Constitution Amendment Bill, which is designed to amend the Constitution to allow for the changes which they wish to make. So therefore, even the structure and composition of the THA, as we know it, the proposal is for that to be changed. All right. And then there's the other Tobago bill, which would then now deal with the question of how you move forward in terms of trying to have the fresh elections for the THA. So there are two bills actually before the Parliament. Now, the whole idea has been that they have been trying to find a mechanism to, give this idea of greater autonomy to Tobago. Now, the THA, the simplest comparison we could use is consider the THA the equivalent of a municipal corporation. So the same way you have the Tunapuna Piarco Regional Corporation, the San Juan Lavatel Regional Corporation, the Digo Martin Regional Corporation, etc., then that's how the THA is for Tobago. Except that it has expanded powers and authority. So therefore, it sets its own annual budget that it prepares, but then of course that has to be sent down to central government, and then the central government will determine how much of that budget they will actually allocate. However, there are certain provisions within the law which say that a certain minimum percentage of the national budget must be allocated to Tobago. Right. So what these bills are trying to do, they're trying to realign those objectives and bring them into a more cohesive and comprehensive fashion, such that they will give effect to what may be the wishes or desires of the average Tobagonian.
Right.
There has, however, been so much to-ing and fro-ing on both sides, because what has happened is that this type of issue has become a political football. So when one party is in government, they, try to promote the bills and they say, look, it's the best thing for Tobago. The other side then says, no, we don't agree, we are not supporting it. And because it's a constitutional amendment bill, it requires a special 3/5 majority. So therefore, you must have the input of the opposition if you, the government, don't have the numbers.
Right.
When the opposition is in government, they then try to promote the bills, and then, when the other party that was in government is in opposition, they then oppose it. And this is the scenario that has been going on for decades, and Tobagonians have really been the political football, so to speak, in this, never-ending game. So, I have tried to voice and raise issues for Tobagonians and for the people of Tobago, and from a business perspective, to say, listen, maybe Tobagonians should rethink and do a quantum leap and a paradigm shift and change the perspective. Instead of allowing the politicians to be playing these games and fighting over these bills, maybe Tobagonians should start focusing on developing the foundations for their economic survival, developing an entrepreneurial class. So therefore, you develop your businesses, your small and micro enterprises. You start looking at things like, for instance, developing solar farms, solar energy farms, wind farms, where you have those massive wind turbines, like what you see, like when you're driving through the Netherlands, you're driving through Amsterdam or Rotterdam, you see these massive wind turbines. And the interesting thing about that is, remember, the Netherlands is the home country for one of the largest oil and gas companies in the world, Royal Dutch Shell. Okay? And the point is, even though they have such massive oil and gas reserves, they are leaders in alternative energy. They have gone miles ahead. They try to harness energy from the sea. So why doesn't Tobago look at that? You have the wave action energy generators, which you put out into the ocean. So therefore, just the natural tidal action of the waves, that generates electricity. These are the things we should be looking at in Tobago. So therefore, you now can then try to promote Tobago as a model island. You go to international agencies such as the United Nations. You say, hey, listen, I want to work with you guys. I want you to, promote me as an example to the world of an island that can be eco-friendly, eco-sustainable, because we are now generating all our electricity from our natural resources in a way that is sustainable. That is what Tobago should be focused on instead of being caught up with, the silly political games that keep being played out over Tobago autonomy and Tobago independence and those things are they really are not your fundamentals. Because even if, right, and let's be practical and realistic, even if those bills were passed tomorrow, okay, so let's say some magic happens and both parties agree and they pass the bills.
Right.
You realize that it's a scenario where Tobago still has to come to Trinidad every year with a begging bowl saying, give me $3 billion, give me $4 billion, because they don't generate their own income. And that's what I keep saying. That's where Tobago should focus on, trying to be self-sustaining in terms of its financial and economic independence. Put down the fundamentals for your economic development, and therefore you don't even have to worry about independence or autonomy after that.
Right, because at this point in time, as it stands, correct me if I'm wrong, the island is not able to be an independent body at this point in time. Therefore,
they're not
like
financially independent. They're not self-sustaining at all, and that's what I keep saying.
The focus, of course, should have been on the island's development before the bill was actually debated.
Thank you, and that's my point. That's my point. And that's where Tobagoans really should be focusing their time and energies, And I keep raising the issue and I keep discussing it. And that's why I say these programs are so useful, because what we try to do and what I try to do is to shine that light so that people can see an alternative path. They can think outside the box and say, well, maybe there's another way to achieve this objective. And, I'll give you a simple example in closing. It's like, for instance, when you're a young person, you're small, you're living at home in your parents' home, they provide food, clothing, shelter, transport, meals, everything for you, because you are dependent on them. When you become an adult and you're working for yourself, you're earning your own money, and you're able to say, well, look, you can buy a car, you could buy a home, or you could rent somewhere, or you could pay a mortgage, then you have that financial independence. So therefore, you don't have to beg your parents to say, well, mommy, could I move out? Or daddy, could I move out? You are your own man or your own woman. You are able to say, hey, listen, folks, dad, mom, I'm going to buy a house. I'm going to buy a car. I'm going to move out. I will visit you guys, but I'm taking my own decisions. Because you have that financial independence. If you didn't have that, you couldn't even think of making that step. So therefore, that's what Tobago needs to do, because it is still at the stage of a child where it needs to come to Trinidad every year for this $3 or $4 billion in terms of their budgetary allocation. But if Tobago was generating its own money, its own income, and in a self-sustaining manner, then you wouldn't need to be asking anybody for independence, because you have that financial independence. That's the fundamental of your freedom. And lastly, this has been played out, and I'll just share this with you in a very real sense. If you recall, and I'm sure your viewers will recall, years ago, there was the classic High Court case in Trinidad and Tobago of the Chief Justice versus the Attorney General. This is where we had Michael de Labastide as the Chief Justice, and you had Ramesh Lawrence Maraj as the Attorney General. And what the Chief Justice at the time said, what Mr. de Labastide said, he said, listen, the judiciary is supposed to be independent, but if the financial purse strings are being controlled by the Attorney General's office, then I, as head of the judiciary, I'm saying that I am not independent, because I have to keep coming to you for everything I need financially. And they ended up fighting this matter out in court. That's to tell you the importance of financial freedom and financial independence. So, I offer this as a light to Tobagonians to say, shift your focus, forget about these bills, forget about the fighting and the bickering that takes place in Parliament, and start working on your fundamentals to develop your own economic freedom, your own financial independence, and everything will fall into place after that.
Okay, Mr. George, before we wrap up quickly, on a lighter note, a word of advice for Trinidadians who are hoping to come to Tobago in the near future for July, August. A word of advice. How do we prepare ourselves to come? What can we expect?
Well, the thing is, I think it all depends on what the government does, if you understand me, because I can't see it being very practical. Think of a normal family coming, you have 3, 4 children, mommy, daddy, whatever, etc. Right, the children want to go to the beach. If the beaches remain closed, that's not an option. You want to go to the reef, you want to go to no man's land, you want to go out to Nyland Pool, you want to do a rainforest tour, you want to, if the place remains closed and locked down, these things are not options. People are not going to want to go, because then what's the point?
Right.
If you understand me,
Right.
you want to go up to Fort George, you want to go up to Fort Campbellton, you want to go to dinner at night, you want to take the family out to a restaurant. You can't do these things if the place is closed. All right?
Right.
So therefore, the government has to give the signal to say, hey, listen, we are going to reopen the economy. And as I said, Tobago is the easiest and fastest place to reopen it. And that way, you actually have an escape valve for the entire nation. Because if it is that people could go and they could lime, they could enjoy themselves in Tobago at least, for starters, then at least you can have persons feeling a little sense of relief and relaxation, that they come out from under this feeling of this curfew and this repression and this state of emergency, so that way they could go relax, enjoy themselves with their families, refresh, recharge, and revive their lives.
So basically you're saying opening Tobago could solve a lot of issues.
A lot of problems for Trinidad and Tobago, not just Tobago. And that's why I've said it all the time. My perspective is always from a Trinidad and Tobago perspective. So any solutions I suggest are not just for Tobago. It's actually nationwide, I look at it.
Because of course Trinidad and Tobago, it's a symbiotic relationship between the both islands.
Of course. And the point is, there are benefits that can be derived for everyone if we take that approach. And it is still not too late, because with the vaccines that the government is getting, they can now focus on Tobago. And you explain to the nation the reason why, and people will appreciate and enjoy it, because they will say, listen, all right, so then that means I know for sure I could go to Tobago, I could take my family to Tobago, I could enjoy myself, we could have a great time, okay, and at least get a little stress relief, because that's what you're aiming for.
Of course, and very inspiring closing words. It's something definitely that should be thought about. Of course, you are, or you have been viewing news and views on ieTV and on iRadioTT.com. In case you tuned in late, in case you missed today's program, here's an invitation to join us this Sunday at 7 p.m. for a repeat of today's program. Mr. George, thank you so very much for, of course, enlightening us as to what's taking place on the Sister Isles, and thank you so very much, of course, for your recommendations. I'm Bina Mohis. Thanks for joining us.